good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. While we're waiting on more folks to join and before we get started, just wanted to do a couple of quick announcements. My name is Pete Eberle, and I'm with the Northern Chapter of CRES, the Colorado Renewable Energy Society. For those of you who are new to our events, CRES and its local chapters provide education, policy advocacy, and community engagement that help accelerate Colorado towards a carbon neutral future powered by 100% renewable energy. Founded in 1996, CRES is a statewide nonpartisan 501c3 not-for-profit that is supported by our sustaining individual members, business members, and donations. Speaking of which, with today being Giving Tuesday and next Tuesday being Colorado Gives Day, please consider supporting us with a donation. You can do so through the Colorado Gives portal by searching CRES, C-R-E-S, or you can go directly to www.cres-energy.org. You can make a donation, become a member, as well as find our social media links, newsletter sign up, and upcoming events. I do want to give a special thanks to our Gigawatt business members, which include Vista Engineering Group, Poudre Valley Rural Electric Association, Kelly Government Solutions, and Moss Adams. And an additional thank you to our Northern Colorado business partners, Solaris Energy, Platte River Power Authority, and Sandbox Solar. So without further ado, I will go ahead and hand things off to our speakers for tonight, Brian Tholl and John Phelan of Fort Collins Utilities. So Brian?
Yeah, good evening. Thanks again, Pete, for hosting us. And thanks to CRES for continuing the support of the carbon-free future here in Northern Colorado. Excited to share a little bit more about what we refer to as Our Climate Future Plan here in Fort Collins. And again, provide a little perspective and updates in what's been happening most recently. But just quick introduction, my name is Brian Tholl. With Fort Collins Utilities in our Energy Services Department. And John, if you wanted to introduce.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm John Phelan. I'm Energy Services Manager and Policy Advisor for Fort Collins Utilities.
So journey tonight will be a little background on the actual plan and the adoption that took place over the past couple of years, but also some of the more recent updates that we've provided to City of Fort Collins City Council related to our pathway to carbon reduction by 2030. So as I mentioned, the Our Climate Future Plan, which John and I may refer to as OCF, generally was a consolidation of 3 different plans that were previously in the implementation phase in Fort Collins: the energy policy, the climate action plan, and the road to zero waste plan. And generally, the consolidation, and yet we identified that the outcomes of the plan were all pretty well aligned. So when we came to an update around 2000, we decided to go at it in kind of a combined forces. And generally, we recognize that in order to achieve the aspirational goals that are set forth in the plan, we needed to center on people in our community. And throughout the planning phase, we identified community priorities and presented community and climate solutions to those priorities, and came up with a number of big moves and next moves, which we refer to, which I'll address in an upcoming slide. But most generally, we have greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, 50% by 2026, 80% by 2030, and carbon neutrality by 2050, as well as 100% renewable electricity target by 2030 using both grid and local resources. In addition, I mentioned the Road to Zero Waste plan, which was included. I won't be focused much on that in today's discussion, but I do have a few backup slides if we wanted to talk a bit more about that. But generally, this was a planning process that was a lot different than previous city planning processes, where we might, for example, do a potential study, a technical potential study, and then find technical solutions that might address some of those, the potential opportunity for greenhouse gas reduction in our community, and then frame up a number of strategies behind it. Generally, we took the approach, as mentioned, by reaching out to our community members and meeting them where they were in order to determine their own priorities and find solutions that have co-benefits with climate. And generally, we also led with kind of a mitigation, resilience, and equity nexus, recognizing that leading with equity also in turn benefits the community from a resiliency standpoint and any future disruptive events such as wildfires and floods, but also addresses the carbon reduction targets that we're after. So it was pretty powerful to reframe this, that again, it's not just an all-out blitz to reduce carbon by any means possible, right? We want to welcome the community to lead this effort with us. This is a community plan. This isn't a city plan. So we have to think beyond our own roles. We have to be very approachable and be able to speak not just on the technical side around solutions, but also be a lot more relatable and pulling in community priorities. And most recently, we've been kind of urging this or pushing forward on this shared leadership model, where we can't go at this alone, right? This isn't just a city-led plan. Sure, there are city-led efforts, but we need partners throughout the community that are willing to help in order to achieve the aspirational goals within the plan. So after engagement with the community, generally we framed up what I have on the screen now are referred to as big moves. And generally there's 13 big moves categorized under better together, live better, resource better, and breathe better. Again, a lot of the solutions a lot of the big moves are focused on resiliency, affordable housing strategies, equity, and also energy and the topics that we'll be talking about tonight. So I mentioned this briefly, that the city-led strategies that I'll refer to here are generally things that are, that are in the city's, direct control, right? They are regulatory strategies. They are planning and infrastructure. They are budgets that are directly driven, or dollars directly driven from city budgets. So generally, we lead in this work, but also recognize that we need to partner with the community to also have kind of a series of co-led solutions, which I have kind of in this middle section here. One component is kind of this disposable bag implementation on the waste side. That's in the co-led space because we are partnering with local grocers and a lot of community partners to drive solutions in that space. And then finally, there's a number of community-led strategies that are outside of the control of the city, which we want to embrace and nurture and help as much as we can, recognizing that a lot of these solutions will likely get us a significant part of the way to our climate goals. So diving in a little more on the energy side, I wanted to call out a number of the energy focused goals in the Our Climate Future Plan, which we'll talk about more throughout the presentation. And again, happy to take additional questions. But generally, providing 5% of community electricity through local distributed renewables. Commercial solar, residential solar, largely programs in this category that are driven by city-led incentives, utility-led incentives programs. We have a goal around an efficiency reduction goal of 20% cumulative reduction in forecast electric use by 2030. Along with that, a 10% reduction in forecasted natural gas use by 2030. On the energy side, or on the electric side, we have been on a solid path. We've generally been around 2% per year. And so, generally we've, over 10 years, that would translate to about a 20% reduction in forecast use. So we've been on that path, but efficiency opportunities have been decreasing over the years as the prevalence of LED technology, as an example, has become a little more prevalent in the market. Natural gas, we're still working on. We do have a number of water saving and gas saving strategies that we've been implementing, but haven't been upwards of the 1% per year. So we do have a lot of work there in both the electrification side of things, which will be contributing directly to that goal, as well as the efficiency side in natural gas. The final two goals are adopting building energy codes on a 3-year cadence. Some of you may be familiar, Fort Collins does and has adopted the most recent IECC 2021 code with local amendments. We do often kind of go a little above and beyond related to energy code to ensure that we're pushing the market where we can. And finally, it's a little bit of an interesting goal, and we had a hard time kind of shaping this one up, but we landed on supporting the deployment of distributed energy resources, DERs, to achieve bidirectional demand flexibility capacity of 5% of peak loads by 2030. What that means is, we're moving from the kind of more traditional demand response program, where we would be traditionally shaving peak and wanting to be able to turn on and activate equipment to follow surplus renewable energy resources. So what that looks like in Fort Collins is, I believe, around 30 megawatts of controllable loads turning on and off. And that mostly relates to water heating, space heating, potentially electric vehicle charging, mobile batteries, stationary batteries. So that hopefully that gives you a little context as to what that goal is. And finally, we wouldn't be doing this any justice without identifying the pricing principles that we have, essentially the 3 pillars of affordable, reliable, environmentally friendly electricity. So these goals below essentially reflect reflect our commitment to that in addition to these above energy goals. So a little bit of a snapshot into the community inventory. And again, this is across all carbon emissions categories, transportation, energy, and the like. So in 2020, we're at 25% below the 2005 baseline. In 2021, we had a small increase, and that was mostly due to some pre-COVID level of transportation and vehicle miles traveled back in the community. So this is kind of where we're at. You can see the path that we've been on since 2005. And I will say that it is kind of ever evolving. We get new data sets regularly that may correct not only our forward-looking forecast, but also kind of our backward casting results. So this is kind of subject to change based on some of the inventory work that we do on a pretty regular basis. And so generally this, do nothing more forecast essentially includes a forward-looking forecast that would include anticipated population growth, local and Fort Collins, and generally gives us a good idea as to what we might expect without any incremental strategies to reduce carbon. So again, 2024, and I'll come back to what the forecast looks like here. We actually in the past 4 or 5 months have really enhanced a lot of our capabilities related to forecasting carbon emissions. And generally, we used to have kind of a what's going to happen in 2020 or 2030 as a result of strategies that we might implement. But now we have kind of a year-by-year forecast, which is being, again, continuously informed and will help forecast out to our 2026 target of 50%, as well as our 2030 goal of 80%. So most recently, the community and city council really asked staff and the city to help put together a number of pathways. And I think they may be called the pathways, we may be interpreted as pathways, but essentially, how are we going to get to our carbon reduction goals? And in order to simplify it in a way, we have determined that there's, again, these 6 primary pathways with a number of strategies below that relate to our big moves and next moves in the Our Climate Future plan. So you can see on the left, this electricity pathway, there's a buildings pathway, industrial, transportation, waste, and land use. And within each of those, there's a number of strategies that roll up to, for example, local renewables might include a commercial solar program or a residential rooftop incentive-based program. So all these strategies kind of build up, and what we did was we forecasted it out on that same emissions pathway that we just showed. So again, this was kind of the do nothing more forecast. And with all of those pathways that we identified, we're targeting about a 70% reduction by 2030, representing a 10% gap, right? So we recognize that over the next 8 years, there's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of potential new city-led projects or potential new community-led carbon reduction projects as well. So that was essentially undetermined to goal of about 9 or 10%. And it's going to require a significant amount of more action to get there. But generally, in those same pathways that I just framed up, you could see which have the most impacts, with electricity being the greatest at this time. So electric, followed by buildings, transportation, industry. This is kind of our local industrial emissions in a separate category, as well as our waste and land use code. I will frame up that the land use code has several benefits in itself, where essentially the potential increase and or 15-minute type of neighborhood approach does in itself reduce vehicle miles traveled and has several other benefits to community members.
Well, Brian, you're right on the land use code one, or the land use one looks very small in this case, but the actual quantification of the impacts of land use end up being captured in transportation, just the way the inventory works. So land use actually has a larger impact than it appears to be in this modeling exercise that we did.
And so again, just breaking down these pathways a little bit more, we will see that the big chunk, the 23% of the electricity will come from a collaboration with Platte River and their generation resources, and working collaboratively with them over the next decade to ensure that Fort Collins is ready to receive power generated at kind of the utility scale from non-carbon resources. And the local renewables being more community-based distributed generation. In the buildings side of things, there's essentially existing building stock, which incorporates a lot of the performance, that 14%. There's efficiency built into that. There's a number of other strategies built in. And there's new construction and the codes associated with new construction across the community, representing, less, but still a pretty good chunk when it comes to our overall community inventory. Followed by what we're framing up as now a pretty reasonable approach to electrification and what we think can get done in the existing building stock when it comes to space heating and water heating primarily, and transitioning those away from natural gas primarily to electricity. So just kind of a call out here that a lot of our existing work, or a lot of our impacts are going to come from our existing building stock. And this is, again, maybe where we could spend some time, and or again, apologies to give you an eye chart here. But generally, within each of those pathways that I just presented, buildings and electricity being the two primary ones, you can see essentially, I wonder if you can see my mouse, but this first strategy is a construction strategy. This is a new construction. So what can codes do? How can codes impact our building use or building stock energy use by 2030? What are the impacts there? And certainly, building codes have a huge impact when it comes to the lifetime of a building, right? But what are the impacts avoided here? On the right-hand side, you could see by 2030. So, you know, you could think of this in a couple different ways, but this is a snapshot for 2030 that we're looking at now. And some of these strategies have much bigger impacts when it comes to, you know, kind of our 2050 goals, and new construction and codes being a great example of that. You can see, again, electrification not being a huge driver, but something that we do plan to incentivize more directly here beginning in 2023 with some of our efficiency works programs and other regional collaborations with Longmont, Levelland, and Estes Park. Other performance strategies, you know, continuing to expand home and business efficiency programs. That's kind of our existing workhorse when it comes to a lot of the results that we've seen since 2005. We are evaluating adding a building performance standards. Some of you may be familiar with the state's requirements for 50,000 square foot and above buildings to meet either a target EUI or a reduction in their own energy use. We'll be evaluating that in 2023 to see what's reasonable for Fort Collins. Another strategy is potentially looking at a point of sale or a point of listing requirement for energy disclosure. So if and when a home is on the market, how does a potential buyer know the energy use of that home? And does that make a better informed decision for the buyer? Strategies been implemented in cities like Portland and a few others for reference. So it's an existing thing that, again, we'll be evaluating in 2023 to determine what that might look like in Fort Collins. And just to call out that, you know, in order to make this more refined forecast of a year-by-year emissions target, we essentially had to make a number of assumptions related to, all right, if we were to have a building performance standards program, what might that look like? So I think, you know, there's a number of assumptions, and the precision of these values on the right can vary pretty dramatically when it comes to looking at any one of these individual strategies. So, and I don't want to go through the rest, but you could see a number of the building strategies, a number of the electric strategies. And again, another call out in that, you know, sometimes the city has direct control over, in this second column on the right, role in implementation. Again, we could implement and enforce building code. That's direct control. Otherwise, you know, through electrification, we might just be providing incentives to motivate homeowners, contractors, and others to upgrade to a more high efficient electric heating system, as an example. And in this category down below, when it comes to, you know, some of our partnerships with Platte River and the utility scale generation, non-carbon generation, we could influence that. You know, we have, you know, 2 members on the Platte River board, and we have that influence. We don't have direct influence on that, but again, we've tried to characterize the city's role in implementation in a number of different ways because it does vary across all of these strategies. So with that, this is kind of the last slide that we did present to Council in our October work session last month, where we casted forward over the course of 5 years and really showed them exactly what they might anticipate related directly to Our Climate Future goals. So at the time, a lot of the land use code work was being done. The active modes plan, which is kind of our modified pedestrian and bicycle plan, it was presented to council. There's this sustainable funding ask right now where we're presenting a number of strategies related to things like fees or taxes or other things that might help with funding climate as well as other needs across the city organization. So this was kind of a transparent approach in casting forward from what we know is coming in order to achieve our 2030 goals. Some of these things are going to need to happen in this time frame and potentially be accelerated. So again, I could pull that back up if we wanted to, but I would mostly just wanted to leave time for questions and also make sure to invite John back in to see if I missed anything that he wanted to add.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I would just say to that, the council questions, we really were trying to be pretty blunt with council. Like if these are all the things that need to happen for us to make these pathways successful, and they don't get us all the way there already. And council, you're going to have to make some really hard decisions when it comes to things like building performance standards, zero carbon building codes in the same time frame, home energy score listing requirements. Those are going to be challenging conversations along with some of the land development codes that are already challenging conversations going on. So we tried to be pretty clear with them that yes, there's a lot you can do, but it's going to take some political will to make it happen.
Okay, first question. What tangible achievements has OCF accomplished that CAP could not?
That's a good question. I think some of them was tangible outcomes. I think we're seeing a much more integrated approach to the solutions that we're bringing forward. So some examples that would have been, could be in the land development code components. So the climate aspects of that process were kind of built into it, similar with the housing affordability plan. And then I would point to the sustainable revenue discussion that Brian mentioned at the end here. So there'll be a work session council on December 13th, where we brought in, there are gaps in funding for transit, for housing affordability, for parks maintenance, and for climate. And we're like integrating those so that rather than peppering the community with potentially like this initiative or proposed tax or this one, it can be a coordinated and combined initiative. So I think that is some really clear wins. I'd say the other is that we've got community members sitting directly on some of with our staff meetings, working on OCF side by side. They're not special meetings, they're just part of the process. And that is completely new as well.
Yeah, I was going to add on that, John. I think, often we've been focused on the outcomes associated with a lot of these strategies, but also the process to get there has pretty substantially changed. I think John mentioned, it's every day now where I'm on at least one call where it could be 3 or 4 community members contributing from that shared leadership model. So very exciting to get community level input that way. And also we've shaped up what we're calling a community consultants program, where we're actually paying for direct feedback on a lot of our implementation strategies to community members. So no longer just kind of we'd ask for your volunteer in time to contribute to the success of the program, but actually valuing their time, signing a contract and providing compensation for developing these plans with us. So again, from a process perspective, it's been pretty, it's been a different approach.
Brian, the underlying premise for that is not because it makes us all feel better to have more people involved in the process, but we will not be able to achieve our goals unless we get significantly increased community buy-in and community participation in all of these initiatives, be it transit or energy. We won't get there. And so it's part of the strategy to be successful, not just sort of more of a feel-good notion about changing the way we do community involvement.
Great. Next question. Virtual power plants have been effective in Europe. Can we do that here before 2030?
Yes. So the grid flexibility and the distributed energy resources pieces that Brian kind of touched on briefly, but so we're actively working within Fort Collins and also with Platte River Power Authority to go beyond just the sort of deployment of those types of resources and adoption by customers to how are those going to be managed for the benefits of, for a variety of different benefits for the system. Some of those will be financial as it relates to when we enter into electricity and energy markets in the next several years. There's going to be a new sort of mechanism for managing that. But maybe more importantly, to sort of maximize the benefit of our intermittent renewable resources on the bulk system and how we can manage our load and our local systems to complement those. A couple of examples, but yes.
Okay, next question here. How do we tease out emissions impacts that are the result of our actions versus impacts that are caused by external factors?
I mean, our primary metric for the community carbon inventory captures everything. So whether we had anything to do with it, or it's the economy, changes in hydroelectric production up or down, whether we had anything to do with it or not. So it's simply an accounting process to manage all of those. Which of those we can directly attribute to our actions? We also have processes to do that are pretty well established in the efficiency space. I know, Brian, if you want to talk about attribution a little bit, and some of the distributed renewables, some of them are going to be a little harder when they're sort of ones that affect, say, traffic operations and things like that. It may be more indirect, but the inventory doesn't care how it happened, and then we can do some really rigorous attribution in some cases and less rigorous in others.
Right. I think that's the benefit of having kind of those absolute goals, right? It's like we know what's happening in the community, and sure, you know, incentives maybe have an impact, behaviors, the market, technologies, and you know, all these things contributing. I think from a programs perspective on the efficiency side, we do have a pretty regular process of going through our own and third-party impact evaluations, where we essentially quantify, it's like, would this have happened in the absence of us giving a rebate? And, you know, 80% of the time, generally that's, you know, depending on the program, of course, 80% of the time, the, you know, incentive has a significant impact on the customer moving forward. And so we'll generally in our implementation adjust our budgets and kind of optimize for those best outcomes. So anyway, that's kind of in the weeds.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned centered on equity at the beginning of the presentation. Can you provide an example of a specific project you are conducting that demonstrates how you center on equity, especially a project that is already producing results that are showing benefit?
I think the planning process in itself did prioritize the voice and priorities identified by historically underrepresented groups, being seniors, college age, racial diversity across the community, different gender identities, and kind of a whole series of identities. So in a way, it was baked into the formation of the plan itself. Now, from a implementation standpoint, we've done a really good job in establishing two things. First of all, measuring where we're at from a participation standpoint related to racial equity. And across our programs, for example, whenever you participate or get a rebate, you'll be asked, a series of demographic type questions where we're doing our best to baseline a lot of or set up a baseline of our existing population of participants in programs. And from that, what we've done is actually established goals around, for example, some of you may be familiar with our Larimer County Conservation Corps collaboration, where we have actually a goal in that program is to reach 20% income below 80% of AMI, I think. I forget, it's a percentage target for income, and also Black, Indigenous, and people of color of a 10% participation in those communities. So I'd say just those two things, baselining where we are in existing programs, and also establishing goals around incrementally increasing participation from an equity standpoint.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. That's some great points. I think part of what the OCF has provided us with is a framework for looking at things in a more comprehensive and intersectional way. An example of that also is our income qualified assistance programs we have are part of our affordability and climate tools as well. And so, for example, we just got, Brian was a big part of this, but getting council also approved what was a pilot program for this discounted rate for income qualified is now a permanent program. And that program brings along with it much sort of enhanced communication and education components and awareness components for those participants in that. We also got approved a budget offer for the next 2 years to focus really on some demonstration projects, improving out how we can do deep retrofits and electrification for not only energy but also health in mobile homes. And we have never done that before. That's been sort of excluded, not intentionally, but because our programs didn't really address the building type of mobile homes. Now we'll be able to really see how we can bring that into our sphere and help that group that it is definitely historically underserved. So a couple of more examples.
Great. Customer-owned renewables have indirect economic benefits like the economic multiplier. Does your economic assessment include DERs off balance sheet to the utility to lower rates and the indirect economic benefits?
So in our sort of annual reporting we do on what used to be the energy policy and now will be OCF moving forward, we do look at the sort of total economic impact of not only the customer renewable programs, but also our efficiency programs. So there are a number of different sort of indirect economic benefits. The energy bill savings get generally used in the community for other goods and services. That has a multiplier effect. There's an employment multiplier effect. So we do have a structure. We can sort of calculate that numbers and show the broader impact. One of the big moves also is a healthy and thriving local economy, because we know that sort of the jobs aspect and sort of quality jobs in the construction type trades for efficiency, electrification, renewables are all important benefits of the whole package.
One thing to add there too is that we've been involved over the past 4 years with Colorado State and Dr. Ellison Carter in conducting an indoor environmental quality study where we're quantifying essentially the air quality, indoor air quality as before and after efficiency improvements have been completed in order to quantify some of the non-energy benefits that might be recognized as a result of the improved indoor air quality. So we also have kind of our eye on a lot of that a lot of the non-energy benefits that could result in some of those increased economic benefits.
And we see a fair amount of our customers, especially in the residential space, where the energy savings is the side benefit and the carbon reduction is the side benefit. Their improved comfort, health, and safety in their home is the primary benefit and value that they see for themselves. And like, oh, by the way, we'll save a bunch of energy too. So.
Kind of sounded like John Fossler there.
We all
might have influenced me over the years.
we all channel John.
Okay, well, that seems to be the end of our questions, but I kind of had one is, you know, as the county is kind of ramping up their planning in this area, and seem to be moving a lot faster here over the last couple of years, are you all doing any kind of coordination with them on their plan? Because obviously, I mean, obviously the county covers a lot of other areas, but you know, a big chunk right outside the city limits is the county. Has there already been talk of kind of almost like your GMA being your you know, looking to expand some of these programs just outside, or are they really restricted to what's in your purview as the utility footprint?
So somewhere in the slide deck here were some small words that said one of the city's roles is to work at all levels. And so that means working at not only city, but also regional, state, and even federal levels. So we do that in a number of different ways, but the county is obviously a partner there. So Karen Champagne, our head of planning, development, and transportation, sits on the executive committee for Larimer County's, I hope I don't get it wrong, Climate Smart Initiative, I think it's called. And we've got a number of staff members that are sitting on different working groups in that as well. Brad Smith already does coordination when it comes to building code, working, including the county in some of those processes. There's some other ones around sort of regional transportation planning that both Larimer County and Fort Collins are partners in that. And the last one I'll throw in is on the waste side of things. The county is actually a primary partner in terms of creating some of the infrastructure that will be necessary to meet our waste goals.
Okay, give me a second here. I've got to put this. Okay, we got 2 more questions. What's the annual budget for OCF and the cost per CO2 equivalent reduced? And Fred, let me know if that's wrong.
That's going to be probably an impossible question to answer. I appreciate whoever asked it. Like, OCF is not a single department. It is a framework and structure that we've got folks working from utilities, sustainability, planning, operation services, building department, all kinds that are working on the various initiatives, and it provides a way of knitting together all these activities and adding new ones so that we can see how those roll up and impact our goals. Back to the earlier question, we can calculate numbers and cost effectiveness for efficiency programs where we have all the information to do that. But a lot of the actions that are happening that are impacting our climate are choices made by residents, homeowners, businesses, individuals in the community. That's where the real investment comes from in their choices, much more so than what the city is doing. There are exceptions to that, obviously, in some of the infrastructure components. But essentially, whenever we bring a specific initiative to council, we'll bring cost numbers, cost and benefit information, but not for the entire initiative as a whole. And that it's essentially, we don't think it's really productive advancement of the necessary conversations as opposed to having those with specific initiatives.
Okay, one more here. With the billions of dollars in the IRA for grid innovation, in the software that could fund the software for DSO controls and enable VPPs for DERs, are you seeking those funds?
Had a conversation about that today. So there's actually a new, it's like an Amber Alert's going off. I don't know if anybody else is getting that. But, there's a new DOE
Yes.
funding opportunity that was announced. Well, a draft. It's not actually hasn't been issued yet, and that looks to be quite promising for some of the software needs in particular and grid modernization that we'll need for our distribution system as well as sort of the communication networks. So we're certainly looking at that. Utilities is also retaining a consultant to help specifically with grant writing and grant administration because we see this as such a significant opportunity. And I think we're also just trying to track really closely what's going on with the Colorado Energy Office, as a lot of the funds are going to end up flowing through the state of Colorado as well.
Okay, sounds great. Well, it looks like that's our last question. So we're going to finish up here right on 8 at the dot. So John and Brian, I'm going to thank you so much for joining us. And for anyone that wants to get a recording, feel free to email me at p.eberle@crest-energy.org or through the info@crest-energy.org email, and I can get you a link from the go-to. But we will be putting this out on YouTube here in a few weeks. And also just a reminder, if you do wish to support us, please go to crest-energy.org or give through Colorado Gives. So thank you both again, and everyone have a great holiday season.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.